seems to be a problem.
The
broadcast is now live.
Yep.
Go.
We are on, guys. We are live and in the flesh.
Bring it on.
Bring it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Atheist Uprising. We've got a great show ready tonight. Apologies from Josh, he's not able to be here. It's his birthday today, so happy birthday, Joshua.
Happy birthday, Josh.
Happy birthday.
Happy B-Day.
So I'll be hosting tonight's show. So welcome everybody. Shout out to the Patreons, obviously, as always. TART and can't remember who the other one is now. Thank you to all the Patreons. And tonight joining me is Scott Williamson. How are you doing, Scott? Great to have you here once again.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you for having me.
And also joining us tonight is Justin Fowler and Mike Flaubert. How do you pronounce your second name? Sorry, I forgot to ask that.
Florbo. You had it right.
Oh, I had it right. Nice.
There you go.
My reading skills are better than I thought. Welcome both of you to the show. I'm going to pass over to Scott now because Scott's the one having the conversation tonight. I'm just here to watch.
All right. Cool. Yeah, so tonight we're just going to kind of have a easygoing discussion with Christians. I don't identify as a Christian. I'm an unbeliever. But on the show we have
shun the non-believer.
Shun them. We have Justin Fowler, who is a Christian, and Mike Florbo, who's also a Christian. Me and Mike have worked before in the past on other podcasts discussing conservative values and principles. I've worked with Justin Fowler as well regarding I had a show called Exploring Epistemology, and he came through on that one. And then the discussion, I have another channel I just started called The Discussion, where I talk about just about anything, and he was on last week, and we were kind of doing an internal critique of his worldview, so to speak. So we're kind of going to do it a little different this time. We're going to be a little more specific, a little more general, to talk about why, Justin is a Christian. We'll talk to Mike about the same conversation with him as well, get two different viewpoints, hopefully, and see how different people arrive at their beliefs in Christianity. I'm not here to debate it. I'm not here to try to show Christianity is true or false or anything like that. I just kind of want to understand how folks come to believe the things they do. Specifically, did Jesus rise from the dead? How do we arrive at that conclusion or that belief? I guess that encompasses Christianity as a religion. Is that correct, Justin? Is that kind of the way you define Christianity, that it's a belief that Jesus was divine in nature, that he died for our sins and was resurrected to be at the right hand throne of God? Is that kind of accurate, or
as far as the creeds and the confessions, that's how it goes. I mean, pretty much the rest is entailed from that. There's more that's entailed from it, but that's the core doctrine.
Okay, awesome. And that's pretty standard for most Christians that I've ever spoken to. That's pretty much the core proposition, that Jesus was actually divine or God or something like that. He was a teacher. He was good enough to die for our sins, and his death is what kind of frees us from sin and death in a spiritual sense, I suppose, for most people. So I guess I'll get right to it, Justin. So what is your best reason, would you say, that Jesus rose from the dead, from the grave? What would be your number one proof of that, or evidence for that?
Well, it's a good question because there's two different levels to this, and I was going to say, I think actually, even though there's an enormous amount of evidence for it, what ultimately is going to be the most comprehensively convincing for any human being is how it relates to the story of humanity. Now, I've discussed with you before evidences and such like, but the thing about it is, when it comes to epistemology, it's been shown that the more you present facts and evidence, sometimes the more people will entrench their own beliefs in opposition to it. So I could go one or two paths. I could take the path of just following the evidence, or I could take the path of showing how the resurrection fits the best into the story of humanity, the things we do know about history, and how it fits with the rest. And then the evidence actually falls into that. It actually makes more sense when you place it within the story. So it is a form of evidence, not a form that a lot of people will think of as evidence these days. But
yes,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was about to kind of say I'm unaware of too much evidence outside of the Gospels and the letters, the epistles of Paul, and so forth, that actually that provide evidence for the resurrection.
Okay.
I mean,
okay,
and again, it's a different thing than saying, did Jesus exist? Like, I guess if someone was to ask me, did Jesus exist? What's your evidence? I could probably come up with the same kind of evidence to prove that Plato existed or something like that. So that's one thing. But then we're talking about something extraordinary, something by definition is a miracle, or something that you don't normally see, or that people don't normally think is possible. So when we think about a miracle, well, to believe a miracle, it would seem that there would be some sort of compelling either evidence or some sort of compelling intuition or feeling or revelation that would move a person to that. Would you say that you're a combination of that, or would you say that you strictly go by the evidence in the Bible, or how would you describe that, as you were almost about to do?
Yeah, it's a plethora of things. I mean, it's not okay. So I'll give you a little peek into my journey. In that, I talked about, before the show, going to mass. It's been a long journey for me to come to the point where I realize that I'm Catholic. Essentially, so I'm now going through catechism. But the reason is because there are a lot of questions that I had that were more adequately answered, I felt, by the Catholic Church. And one of those is the role of the Bible. And I was raised to believe that you start and end with the Bible. And what was actually conveyed through that is like it just kind of dropped out of heaven. That kind of feeling or idea, even though they didn't say it outright. And therefore, you just start there and you read your own plain reading, and it ends up being your own interpretation most of the time. And even scholars can be misled. So what I realized actually is that the Bible is a product of the church. So I don't start from the Bible as the very beginning point. I start with actually the revelation of Jesus Christ is actually a transcendent revelation. And if if you go by its own internal consistency, then it should be the case that the Spirit will reveal to you. Now he will use evidence as well, but this isn't something that it's actually a sort of naive epistemology the way we just build facts together and then come up with a picture, and eventually we have the conclusion. Most of the time, that's not how it works, especially if we're emotionally involved. If we're sort of emotionally removed from it, yeah, maybe, but that's generally not how it works. And this is obviously something that's very personal and crucial to each person, right? So there's a bias problem. So anyway, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different lines of evidence that can be employed. The problem is, again, there's an epistemological issue with bias and everything. And and that's true of pretty much anything that is actually engaging to us, that actually has an importance or significance to us. So these evidences can be used, I think many times primarily they're to help believers see there's an objectivity to their faith. But there have been cases where non-believers have, through studying the evidence, this has even happened with New Testament scholars, where they study the evidence and eventually it compels them to at least give it heavy weight, and then they come to the point where they're open to that revelation, right?
What was that revelation specifically? Can you kind of indulge us on that one? Like, what was it, do you think, that scholars that are formerly unbelievers, and then they've done the scholarly work, the history, and now they're converted? Do you have a name of those scholars? Anything in particular that you can point to? Like, this is a scholar. He used to be an unbeliever. Now he's a Christian, and these are the reasons why. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, there's Pinchas. Let's see, Pinchas Lapide. He was a Jewish historian, and he's a big example. In the 20th century, he studied the evidence and eventually came to believe.
Okay, what was the evidence for him?
Oh,
or are you sure? I don't expect you to know, but just wondering if maybe you had that information.
Okay, well, if you want me to get into the evidence, I mean, I was going to take the route.
You go any route you want. I was just kind of just going down your path, but you go where you want to take it. That's right.
Yeah, I think it might actually serve my time better too. So, C.S. Lewis talked about in his book Miracles. He discussed the resurrection in one of his chapters there, and basically said, if we have the story of humanity, like, it's kind of like if you have an ancient piece of music. Oh, hold on. Am I still here?
Yep, you're still here. You got good connectivity
on the loading screen, so I'll make sure I'm still on.
Yeah,
Let me get somewhere else. Hold on. Okay. Did you lose me?
Okay. Nope, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We can hear.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So, it's like finding, say, an ancient piece of music, and the middle part is missing. How would you go about finding out what part was missing? Well, you'd have to find the piece of music. Like, say you had several options to go from. You'd have to find a piece of music that ties in with the beginning and the ending, right? That would make sense with the whole. So that's basically what I'm talking about here. So there are multiple problems that I believe the resurrection solves, and of course, one of the biggest is the obvious, that it's the fear or the finality of death and the injustice that creates. There are multiple reasons why it does, and I'm just going by one of the most obvious. There are other examples of this too, where it fits in. But
so just to recap real quick before we lose anybody here. So basically, the resurrection kind of ties together some problems in history or life of human beings, right? Is what you're saying? Like,
right.
You mentioned death, and what was the other one you mentioned so far?
That was basically the one I mentioned so far.
Okay. So it was death. It's an answer to the question of death, and it
Right.
explains it really well. Let's just grant, for the sake of conversation, that the resurrection story seems to neatly solve the problem of death and evil and all of these things, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The fact that we have, and I'm just going to ask you a skeptical sort of question, so don't let it throw you. It's just to kind of explore. But let's say we have a perfect explanation for death and sin and all the things that we're assuming exists here. Okay. Because something explains something really well, does that make it true in your eyes? The fact that it ties that stuff together?
Well, not necessarily. It depends on. I think you have the explanation, or the possible explanation, and then you can investigate whether it actually happened. Okay. Because there are all kinds of mythologies that would purport to explain, kind of tie the story together, and even if you believe that's the case, sometimes you can fool yourself. And if it didn't actually, if it purports to be historical and it didn't actually happen, then that's a major problem, right? So you do have to have that as well. But the reason that I'm taking this path is because hold on just a second. Let me turn off Google Maps. It's going to be distracting. Okay. Yeah, okay. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, just because if it purports to be historical and it didn't actually happen, then that's obviously a major problem. But the reason that I was going that route is because, again, there's an epistemological issue with how we come to believe something. And so, yes, I believe the facts are explanatory, that they do provide a coherent justification, even on their own. I mean, you could just use the facts on their own.
So what facts are we? What are those facts?
Okay, I'll go ahead and go into this because even though I didn't finish the other line of evidence, I would just want to show this because I know your audience is going to be very much about evidentiary epistemology and all that. So, basically, there are two lines of evidence I would cite, and one is the historical evidence, and the other is the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, the Shroud of Turin. That is very interesting.
Yeah.
So, the Shroud of Turin is basically the shroud that Jesus wore when he died. Now, they've supposedly found this, and they were able to actually measure it and kind of look at it and conclude that, a lot of people conclude, especially Christians, will conclude that this shroud is proof that Jesus actually died, and this was the shroud, and this counts as evidence that he died. Okay, let's just assume the Shroud of Turin is legit with Jesus, right?
Okay.
How do we conclude the story is true based on that shroud?
Okay, well, there are some very, very strange anomalies with how the image was formed. So I'll just run over the basics. So you have a linen shroud, right? And it's composed of fibrils. Basically, they're the little tiny, like when you're looking at the carpet really close, you have the little tiny carpet hairs. It's composed of fibrils like that. Now, the image, a lot of people at first blush thought, is this painted on or something like that? Well, it's not. It was actually formed due to scorches on the very topmost parts of the fibrils, not even like the whole fiber of it, the whole strand. It was just the very, very top, and that's very strange. So it was formed by some kind of scorching, And the other thing is it's a negative image, so it's not like a positive image. So you know, like with a, you know, back in the day when when photographs were made manually, they go in the darkroom and they, you know, they take the negative and then form the actual positive picture. The dark is light and light is dark, right? So yeah, that's because the more elevated parts of his face scorch, or supposedly those parts of his face scorch the fibrils more. Okay, so it's a negative image, and another thing about it is that let's say that someone took a 3D model of a human body, and like a metal one, and heated it up really hot, and then placed the shroud around it, and just enough where it would just scorch the top, right? Well, it actually wasn't formed that way. So because it wasn't wrapped, like it. So what they conclude is that, you know, because the image is actually kind of perfect, just looking at it like a portrait facing forward. It wouldn't be that way if it was wrapped around him. So what they concluded is that it must be that somehow this body, whatever, if it was a real body or a model or something, it was kind of hovered between the layers of the fabric. So the fabric was above and below, and so somehow it happened. Like it couldn't even be wrapped, right? It couldn't even be placed onto the thing. So so basically those layers of the fabric were taut, like completely taut, no wrinkle whatsoever. And the image was perfectly placed onto it. Those are the bells for mass.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But yeah. So apparently it looks like, I'm sorry if is that really loud, like distractingly loud?
It's kind of loud. But
okay, I'm gonna try to walk.
Bearable, I guess.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
I'll just try to finish up here. Yeah, it is. But so it must be that there was some kind of radiation that came out from this form of this body and scorched just the topmost of the fiber. And that's a really mysterious thing. So it looks like, and again, we don't actually have some kind of, we don't have a video camera that was recording what was actually going on.
Right.
But it seems like it lends easiest to an explanation that Jesus' body was hovering between the sheets of the shroud, and somehow, like, his resurrection body radiated something like light or heat, or some kind of heat, obviously, where it scorched the fabric. And there's a bunch of other things that there's, like the flora from first century Judea, and a bunch of other things that come together to make it seem authentic. And also, I know that there are people who believe that it was debunked by carbon dating, but it wasn't. There was a piece added onto it, and that's what they tested. And there was like a lot of shenanigans that were going on.
I wanted to ask you about that. So the earliest date that I've ever heard for the dating of the shroud was like AD 400 or something like that, was like the earliest. But let me just ask you this, which is very fascinating, by the way, if it's that old, because it used to be that it was in the Dark Ages, like a little further into the Dark Ages, like say 12th century. But let me ask you this, if it was shown to your satisfaction that the Shroud of Turin was debunked, that it was made up or it was a forgery of some kind, to your satisfaction, would this change your belief in Christianity at all?
Well, no, because it's an additional line of evidence. It's not the only one. I think the historical facts stand on their own. And
so we can kind of table that one. In our time left, is there anything more compelling for you personally that kind of led you to believe Jesus was resurrected?
Oh, personally?
Yeah.
Like personal,
like beyond
encounter?
Like, or more compelling to you, whatever that is, besides the Shroud of Turin, because you say that is not going to affect your belief one way or the other, whether it's true or not. It doesn't really matter. What is
Okay.
the other thing that would matter? Can you think of anything that would falsify your belief?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think what you're really getting at is I have had personal encounter with what I believe is a personal encounter with Christ. I know not everybody would agree. They might say, well, maybe you thought it was him, or maybe it was just a hallucination of your brain. Maybe you're kind of schizophrenic a little bit, or something like that. But I would disagree, because one reason is because actually these experiences have more stabilized me psychologically and led to more mental health for me. And I wouldn't expect some kind of mental disease or hallucination to do something like that.
Gotcha. So it's basically a very reasonable belief in your mind.
Yeah.
That gives you some psychological protection, or I don't know how to say it, but maybe something soothing to you, or maybe soothing isn't the right, maybe something that helps you, unlike an illusion or a lie would do.
And also,
let me ask you this, just
Okay,
based
go ahead.
on that, if a Hindu or a Muslim were to tell you that their beliefs give them a lot of psychological benefit in the same utility that Christianity does to you, could they be mistaken in your opinion?
Oh, they could be. I wouldn't necessarily conclude that it was. I mean, I'm not a heavy exclusivist. I believe that God speaks to people in different religions.
Okay, gotcha. So it could be that everyone is getting the same benefit from a core belief that is kind of beyond just the resurrection of Jesus. And it could be because, Muslims, Hindus will probably deny that resurrection actually happens, not part of their worldview, right? But they get the same psychological benefit. Maybe they become more moral people, or maybe they become more happier. If this can be true for them, can their beliefs be wrong?
Oh,
like if they tell you Jesus did not rise from the dead, and the reason I know that is because I'm a Muslim, and I know being a Muslim is true because it gives me psychological benefits.
Confirmation.
No. Well,
Confirmation,
no. That's not the only reason I was saying that. I was saying that. I was saying that I don't think that it's a mere hallucination because of, or like mental breakdown or something like that, because of the psychological. I wasn't saying this proves that Jesus Christ rose from the dead and all that just by itself.
Right, of course, it's the shroud, it's the psychological benefits, it's the and then I'm pretty sure the historical things that you could probably talk about too. I'm just kind of see the whole point of this channel actually is we're trying to figure out how can atheists or unbelievers talk to Christians in order to understand them. So we just want to understand from your words what it is that led you to these beliefs, and if we can talk about them, challenge them in a healthy way without really trying to say you're wrong or lodging some sort. How the debates usually go.
Let me jump in for just a minute on
that.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, go ahead. I'm gonna go to service. So
okay, man. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you.
And I'll watch
Justin.
the rest of this later. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Bye.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay, Katy.
My firsthand experience as far as dealing with atheists, for the most part, and I try not to wipe with a broad brush, people of any particular belief structure, whether it be, Muslim, Catholic, whatever. Okay.
Yep.
But my personal interaction with many atheists thus far has been the approach of like, oh, well, you believe in, scary guy in the sky, you're an idiot. Right. And so that's not exactly, if you're trying to convince somebody of your own belief, whatever that belief may be, calling them stupid is not necessarily the most
You think?
Effective approach. I mean,
right.
and so I can understand why atheists, have their structures and why they believe things, because they want something tangible. They want to actually, touch, feel, smell, whatever, right? But
Hey, Mike, thank you so much for saying that. And as a matter of fact, before you go on, I just wanted to jump in really quick and interject. Can you tell our audience of atheists how you would much rather have these discussions?
Oh, well, I mean, it would be much more effective and more convincing if they come at it from an angle of, hey, we understand, or I understand why you believe the way you do. Either you grew up in it, it's what you've done all your entire life, but here's kind of like, why we think, or I think the way that I think, right? That's a much more engaging and at least mutually respectful way of approaching, rather than, oh, well, you're an idiot. You're just an idiot, right? Because
Hey, Mike,
here's
another one. Here's another one. I understand the way that you come to believe. I understand you believe what you do.
Mhm.
I understand that. How did you come to believe that? I'm just mirroring exactly what you told me.
And that at least opens the door for conversation.
Right.
When you just bust down the door, guns blazing, with this approach of like, you're an idiot, then why would anybody, whether they're a faithful person or not, why would they want to engage any further? There's no benefit to that, right?
Correct.
Now, I'm not, and again, I'm not going to say that all atheists do this. The ones that I've encountered over the last 15, 20 years,
mm-hmm.
I can't think of one that wasn't that way.
I think I agree with you, and it's part of the reason that I started to study the Socratic method. Because I'm an unbeliever, and part of what I like to do is have conversations about it. I used to be very, very, very religious, but I've since walked away from that, grown out of it, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah,
I'm out of it.
I think I know why. Because religion, as it's structured throughout culture, history, and so on, there's so many different religions and so many different ways to belief. I've had to separate the entire concept of Christ and God, separate it from religion, because you have, for lack of a better way to put it, you have a source. Okay, you have your theistic source, and then you have all the different interpretations of
mm-hmm.
the information that comes from said source, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're human, because we're imperfect, because we're going to understand things. Religion is a really, really complex version of telephone theory. Okay, as is politics, as is everything from politics to talking about cars and whatever,
anything else, sports, right. Yeah.
Because everybody's going to interpret things with variation. And
so if religion, if religion isn't really, it's kind of complex and all of that, and you're kind of parsing out religion from your belief in Christ and these sort of things. What was it about? And I guess I could ask you the same thing. Do you believe that Jesus was divine, died for our sins, and was resurrected to heaven? I guess that's the first thing I would ask. Religion aside,
based on my upbringing and based on, I studied the Bible a bunch when I was a kid. And, looking into it throughout the many years I've been around, there's too much documented stories, tales, books, of religious nature to be like, well, we're going back, a couple thousand years, there's something to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you combine your documentary evidence, okay, the books of the books of the Bible, I look at the Bible as multiple books combined into, out of convenience, the Bible, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were written, I believe they're written at different time, different segments of time. And then at some point in time, they were combined, and Gutenberg essentially assembled them into what we call the Bible. And so a lot of them document the history of kind of the world before Christ and then during Christ. Okay, Old Testament, New Testament,
mm-hmm.
and with as for as long as the story has persisted, there's something to that, right? I think it's more likely than not that many of the core elements within the tales of the Bible, when you kind of like filter away a lot of the superfluous, minutia
Minutia of it all, yeah.
Of it all, okay? And so I like to take things and oversimplify them, right?
Gotcha.
Because as human beings, we tend to complicate things to either appear more educated, right? Or to just kind of rebrand things to our own, wants and
bias. Yeah, bias.
Exactly. And so when you have, literally hundreds, if not thousands of different forms of Christianity, right? You got Seventh-day Adventists, you got Baptists, you got Mormons, you got Catholics, you got, Jehovah's Witnesses, just to rattle off 5. Okay. And then within those, you have Southern Baptists, and, you have traditional Baptist, and you have Pentecost, and you have all these different, ways.
Well, me and Katy already know that Jehovah's Witnesses are the true ones.
They are the most persistent. I will
give them that.
You know what I mean? And so when you have all these variations of the same story, I try to what's the most logical way to peel back the layers, right?
Gotcha.
So I've boiled it down. For me personally, I boiled it down to 2 words. You know what I mean? The whole idea behind Christ and what he taught others to do, to be like Christ, was to be kind.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's good enough.
Let me do this just for a little thought experiment. Because you believe that a guy named Jesus did live. Do you believe that he actually died and was resurrected? Do you believe that that's true? Okay. So let me ask you this. This is just a thought experiment. Not asking you to bring this on board in your views. I respect you too much for that.
Of course.
But I would ask you this thought experiment. Suppose to your satisfaction, let's say you went on a time machine and you flew back, you went back in time to the 1st century and you saw what really happened. And what really happened was Jesus, I don't know, he was taken off the cross and thrown in a mass grave and forgotten about. And then all the people were wondering, but how would you come back and explain how we get Christianity today? Suppose that's the case. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. How do you explain now Christianity? And how do you explain the fact that we have the Gospels as they are, everything just as it is today, under that different scenario of reality?
I'd probably have to exist in that timeline far longer to be able to explain the how, right?
Of course, we would all have to, but if you gave it your best guess, what could you come up with?
Aside from that whole premise as a thought experiment is kind of well above my pay grade.
Okay.
Because
gotcha. So
because let's pretend for a minute that actually occurred, right? We found Doc Brown, we got in the DeLorean, we sailed back to 1st century. All right, cool, right? You'd have to have something to bring back with you, right? Some type of to prove what you saw.
Well, I mean, to yourself. Let me phrase it this way. You're not talking to anybody else. This is just for you, your own pride. No one's going to believe you anyways.
Well, yeah,
that you
exactly.
got on a time machine and went back. We all know that. But let's say you did, and 100% you went back in time, and whatever the scenario is that convinced you 100% that Jesus did not rise from the dead. For me, the first thing that pops out to me is pretty simple, and I'm a very simple-minded person. I'm obviously going to be wrong about a lot of things.
Sure.
But just in my own thinking, Well, I've never seen people rise from the dead. And now I know that Jesus didn't rise from the dead 100% for sure. The next thing that I'm going to go to is things that I do see. I do see people lie. I do see people exaggerate, make up stuff, embellish. I've seen all of this stuff. I've even seen people die for things they believed in that weren't true. And they said that it was true and they died for it. Like, I've seen accounts and with my own eyes, things like that. So it wouldn't be a big leap for me to come up with some scenario that could explain that. I guess that's my only question to you is what would you think of? But I guess it wouldn't be the liar scenario for you necessarily. How would you rule that out? That people lied, people made it up?
Well, as humans, we are going to lie. We're going to embellish. We're going to, add details that, may or may not have happened. An easy example of that, they use in the legal world where, 25 people see a car crash, right? And you interview 25 people. You're going to get 25 different versions of that car crash. Okay. So putting myself in that scenario, if something were to occur that I was able to, to definitively see that, hey, this didn't happen, I probably would keep it to myself, to be honest.
But to yourself, would you think about it? Like, would you think to yourself, how did Christianity? Because I was convinced before that this had to have been true, but now I know it's not true. So how do I put the puzzle back together?
I don't really think that that's something that I would, I would necessarily deviate from, because let's just say, for example, that scenario happened. Okay. If I die, or when I die, right, and I was deceived for however purpose it was, just then I have it there just in case. I'll still believe, and I know that's going to really kind of, that might rile up some atheist types as well. Even if you have the evidence right in front of you, well, we're talking a very hypothetical situation, that is literally at the current time impossible. Right. And that whole idea of time travel has fascinated me since 1985.
Me too.
You know what I mean?
Back to the Future. Yeah.
Right, man. That was that was a whole big,
one of my best movies of all time.
One of the very best. It's one they'll never reboot. And
I can watch it over and over and over and never get tired of it.
Oh yeah. But without getting too far off in the weeds about time travel, it's just one of those things of like, everything that we experience, everything that our brain processes from physicality to into our mind gets converted into electrical information, electrical energy, right? Because that's what our minds and bodies are. It's a collection of synapses firing and processing information and essentially electrical impulses that our brains translate into information. This is hard,
solid,
it's harder, and so is anything real at that point, right?
Well, there is a thing called epistemic circularity. It is a thing in philosophy. It's basically where we bottom out with what we know, why we know what we know. And it could be, and not that I really think it's a really good argument, but people will say, well, basically it always bottoms out to, well, I exist. That's the first thing I know is I exist. And then someone can say, well, how do you know you exist? Because I exist. It's like, well, that's kind of circular. Like, you can't say that you know you exist because you know you exist, can you? But then we do. All of us kind of base ourselves on that assumption. So regardless of how, I could argue that, well, if you didn't exist, then you couldn't experience existing. So the experience is what gets you out of that circularity. But some people would disagree for other reasons, and that's fine. We can say, yeah, let's just go ahead and just grant, for the sake of conversation, we've got this epistemic circularity.
I
We
think
build up from there. Yeah, we think therefore I am, and from that we know that you can't exist and not exist at the same time. That becomes a contradiction. Now we have the laws of logic, and we start building from there.
Well,
So my epistemology is to make as few assumptions as possible. Like, I already know that there's going to be some assumptions we make, and something we can talk about validity, we can talk about soundness within our arguments, and soundness within our speech and stuff like that, and claims or whatever. But I try to take on as less of these assumptions as possible.
right.
It seems that with Christianity, there's a lot of assumptions going on in the background, and we would have to actually, to really talk about a lot of this stuff, we'd have to go down the rabbit hole of our epistemology to understand, like, well, for Jesus to be resurrected, there has to be, the nation of Israel and all the history that's talked about. So we have to figure out if that's true. But then if that's true, it means that there's a God is true. So we have to go back and understand, is there God? How do we know that there's God? How do we know it's this God and not that God? How do we know there's any God? How do we define? I mean, it gets really in the weeds, and it really goes down that rabbit trail.
Yeah, the complexity knows no boundaries. And so, I look at it like this, right? I think, therefore I am. So if I am, then I have value, at least to myself. So I want to preserve that self as best as I possibly can. I want to preserve my, biological lifeline, if you will, my children, my own health, the health of my family, right? Because those things have value. I know my children exist because I can hold them, I can hug them, I can speak to them, I can disagree with them, I can fight with them, right? And so those things, those experiences, even if they're not the best experiences, they hold value, right? And that value is kind of a self-described thing, right? If I say, this is valuable, well, it's valuable to me. It doesn't mean anything to you. Doesn't necessarily have to. So our relationship with a deity of sorts, that's our value to ourself, right? Because it's ultimately our relationship with whoever we describe as God, or if someone's, say, of the atheist kind of proclivity, then you have that's their value, right? And so I can respect that. I may not necessarily agree with it, but I'm not going to tell them, you're wrong.
Well, this kind of ties into a comment or a question out here in the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to say
Annihilator.
we've got some questions coming in at the moment. So
you want to go ahead
and
go ahead and post them up there, and we'll go over them real quick before the end of the hour.
All right. Well, the first question was from Cafe. He's asking, has the panel considered a spiritual resurrection rather than a literal resurrection from death? And he clarifies that later on with a mystical experience, or within psychology, an ego death.
Yes, that's a very true thing. It's something that people can attain through different means. It could be through psychedelics, it could be through meditation, it could be through being in the flow state where you're just focused on different activities and you're devoted to a singular focus. You can actually kill your ego that way, at least temporarily. But the ego does exist for a good reason in nature, in my opinion, based on everything I've ever read, because after all, if we didn't really care about our ego, we wouldn't make much of a fuss about staying alive, period, much less procreating and doing other things for ourselves. So I've heard this in religious terms that Jesus dying is a spiritual death or an ego death, so to speak. That's all great and good, but can you do that without Christianity? Can you believe in such things without Christianity?
Well, I mean,
I already do.
Given the record of the trauma that leading up to the crucifixion, any living mortal being at the time, right, is going to expire. Okay. The beatings, the physical hanging on, the lance through, through the abdomen. Okay. That's going to kill you. Right. And every one of us dies. There's no way around it. And so the whole concept of resurrection, how I see it, is we're all going to experience some sort of a physical death. Okay. And somewhere in the scripture, I can't remember exactly where, but it mentions a body of flesh and blood and then a body of flesh and bone. Okay. And so when you see the difference in the text of those scriptures, right, there's key elements to that description. Okay. So if you understand kind of like the nature of our organs, okay, and I like to pick on the liver because the liver is a very fascinating organ. You cut off a piece of the liver, it grows back. Okay. So if we are created in the image of God, okay, in this format, right, lungs, heart, liver, spleen, whatever, okay, those organs, if you want to call it designed, that's fine, to function on an immortal level, okay? So the liver, for whatever reason, has that ability to not necessarily die, you know what I mean, from in the context that we know about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cut off a piece of it, it grows back. And you see other animals that do the same thing. Lizards, the tail's cut off, they grow back, right? And so if those elements are true, then the body that we gain post-death would be a tangible body of flesh and bone, right? Just looking at it from a logical standpoint based on the text that, that I've read, and kind of go at it from there. So if that is, let's say it's factual, okay, then the body of flesh and blood is our mortal self. The body of flesh and bone, still tangible, is our immortal self.
Okay. Because, the Bible does talk about the blood, the life is in the blood.
Correct.
And so, there's a difference between bone and marrow, where the spirit is supposed to be able to separate between the bone and the marrow and the life and the death. So I understand what you mean. And so we get into a lot of figurative speaking and a lot of figurative language to describe our beliefs. And, to a certain extent, I don't really have a issue with that, just as someone who's, say, from a political point of view, you may say, because such ideas are not forced upon people. They're not trying to violate my sense of what's logical, what's possible, what's, they're not trying to take that foundation from me. Like when the sort of religions that me and Katy came from, those were the literalist views that they pretty much disrespected your common sense and your skepticism, and, these things, even if they were true, it's like you said, you don't want to call somebody stupid. You don't want to shame somebody into believing certain things because they're dumb or they're spiritually, I've been called just the other day, what was I called? A narcissist, because I couldn't understand how a person spoke to God. He was like telling me he heard the words of God, and I was just simply asking, so how do you differentiate between an illusion of your mind and actuality of God? He goes, well, that's because a narcissist like you would never understand. So it's like shut down the conversation.
And that type of phraseology will emanate from the person saying it, that they don't really have anywhere else to go when they shut it down like that, and they just end the conversation by it's the same thing like Godwin's law. The first person to call you a Nazi, they're the ones that lose, the argument. Right.
And then, so the whole point to that would be, for me, when someone speaks about their beliefs in the sense of, well, I believe these things are actually figurative or analogies, they don't bother me, because I kind of sort of, just as a pantheist, somebody who understands there's a little truth in all religions, there's a little truth in everything.
Sure.
It doesn't offend me. It doesn't bother me. I understand that. And even on a literal, even if you were to say this is literally true, that, ego death, I already believe that too. So nothing like that really bothers me. But
is it plausible to be both? I think so. You know what I mean?
That might be a part that I have a little bit of misunderstanding with. Like, are we able to physically be resurrected from the grave after we've turned to dust? I guess there's no logical contradiction. In that case, it's possible. And, and everything's possible in the fantasy land, you know. But is it realistic? Is there a way that I could be certain that this is a truth? That, I guess that would be my only challenge there. How could I know that a resurrection is possible?
It's something that is so deeply entrenched, because when you look at humanity, okay, and well, not even humanity, just life in general, okay, every living creature has this core desire for existence to live.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so instinct, defense, you know, preservation of life, right? We see it pretty much everywhere in the animal kingdom. We see it, you know, in ourselves for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're in Canada and you play with the maid system. But okay, whatever. That's a whole different topic. But when you look at that core desire, right, there's a fear there of no longer existing. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so since that is the ultimate final in our perception of this world, okay, that's the ultimate final, you know, thing, because nobody's come back from being dead that we can talk to, that we can, you know, face to face, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where a portion of faith comes into play, where, you know, you're like, okay, do you believe what this person's telling you about this guy from 2000 some odd years ago that, you know, walked around and, you know, in the Middle East and was teaching people how to, you know, kind of how to live, and, you know, these are our kind of, here's the old way of doing things, this is the new way of doing things, okay?
You know,
and, you know, you have to have some level of faith to believe that what that person is telling you is true, and so we have our own ways of perceiving that. Okay,
I guess I kind of have faith in the opposite direction, you might say. Somebody could view it that way, because have you ever heard the saying, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not?
Yeah.
So everything in my experience tells me that, yeah, I may really want to live forever. Even if I did want to, I've kind of gotten over that. I've kind of like gotten at peace with my non-existence. I even think that in a way, in some aspect, I don't even exist now, because the idea of a self is kind of a construction that we kind of built through our memories and through our stories we tell ourselves about our goals and who we are as a person. But we know that we change, we go through different changes throughout the life cycle, and even our skin sheds, our cells shed. So it's never there tomorrow that was there just a few months ago. So I'm kind of at peace with the idea that I may not, just like before I was born, I may not exist.
Let me
That
ask
may
you
be
this.
fine though.
Let me ask you this, because this topic has come up in a couple different circles.
Mhm.
You know, do you have an inner monologue?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever been in a situation to where, and I'll just use a random example, you're driving along, okay, and something just kind of in your mind pops in, you're listening to music, and something Saul said, you need to change lanes. And you're like, okay, you change lanes, and something happened in that other lane that, you know, unexpected, and you avoided something that, you know, you had no way of knowing, you know, foreshadowing, whatever, foreknowledge that something, you know, had you stayed there, what prompted that?
Yeah, I haven't had a real strong experience like that. There was life endangering that I somehow avoided through my intuition or some sort of voice in my head. But I have heard of these things, and my mom tells me about these stories all the time.
I've had that
So
happen
there-
times.
Yeah,
So
I've had
there-
it happen as well.
So there's a lot of things that at play there. I mean, there's a lot of different solutions to that issue. Some of it could be God. Some of it could be your psychic. You know, you've got that's a thing in reality. Then there's more other sort of things like maybe you're counting the hits and you're not counting the misses, where your intuition, your intuition, by the way, is just a memory that resides in you that when you're in a similar situation, it kind of keys you off to say, hey, this is what could have happened last time. Let's do it again to avoid it again. And you do that. Now, that's one explanation. Honestly, I don't know the answer, what that may be.
And
I'm very agnostic.
I mean, I it happened to me, and I just put it down to the subconscious. The subconscious
Right.
worked out. There was
What's that
a
source
series
of
of different.
You know what I
What's
mean?
the source of the subconscious?
Right. Like,
It's
where
same
does
as
that
the
come from?
conscious. It's just part of your natural brain with the neurons firing. It's built up between memory and all of our different sensations and everything. All of our
Yeah.
different senses are all
Because all that
fed into
requires
that.
energy. It all requires energy, right?
Yeah, of course.
The electrical impulses that cause our heart to pump, to beat, to pump blood through our system. There's electrons going through there all the time, until one day they're not,
Correct.
And so it's, at least in my mind, it's more comforting to think that the reason that I exist in this form, okay, that I can touch and feel and experience and think and love and hate and, and be sad and experience all the emotions and experience, the ups and downs of life.
Mm-hmm.
All that, it makes more sense in my mind that that's a gift given to me from my Heavenly Father.
And that's maybe the difference between the unbeliever and the believers, is that they're wired up a certain way where they really want to feel comfort, and then they want to attribute that comfort to a loving father figure who's looking out for them. And then there's other people who maybe have gravitated or always had it in their personhood to just feel like, life is random. I have to make my own way. I can't rely on comforts and things. I have to create my own comfort. I have to create my own. And the odd thing about that, though, is I think that we all sort of share that part, though. I think even a believer understands that, look, if I want a good job, or I want this girl, or I want this thing, I have to work hard. I have to do something about it. I can't just wait for it to happen.
Right.
So I think in that way, we're all the same. It's just that when it comes to these big questions, like about God, about what is that voice in my head, these sort of big questions that aren't so readily able to answer, we tend to either gravitate towards, the unseen spiritual God figure, or I don't know. There's some people are just comfortable saying, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think what a lot of folks want is they don't want to be able to say, I don't know. They want to know. So if they don't know and they can't find out because, the information is either not readily available or it's, too hard to find, it's just like, okay, then it's not real. Right. But it's okay to not know. Right. There's countless things that I don't know.
And you know what? That is a great part to kind of do a hard stop on. And we are up at the hour, and I have to run. I'm going to my next thing.
Yeah.
But that's a great place to end up. If you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's good to be genuine about it and upfront about it. And it's great that we could sit down and have conversation with two different Christians who have slightly different views. And we were able to pull off a nice conversation. Can we get a hand for that?
No, I want to yell and scream and be all emotional.
Yeah, we want to kill each other. Right?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good place to stop. And it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for both of you.
Thank you for having
Scott
me.
and Mike. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
As always,
thank you so much.
Absolutely fantastic.
Right.
Before we go, I'd like to make a call out for the Patreons. I've remembered the other Patreon now. So thank you very much, Tart and Linya, for your contribution to the channel. If anyone else wants to contribute to the channel, you can always check out the Patreon, where you can send in any donations that way. We have some new shows coming up in the future, so I think tomorrow Josh is back hosting another discussion. So please check out that, and I think the time for that is 9 p.m. Eastern, I think. So Yeah, we look forward to that. And also, obviously, next week we'll be having some more shows as well. So thank you very much for everyone for watching, and see you next time.
Take care.
All right. That was awesome, guys. Thanks a lot, man.
That was really good.
Yeah, I don't have a stop stream button now.
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm going to jump out of here while I can.
Yeah.
I got to head on out, man. I will talk to you guys later.
Hey, travel safe, bro.
All right,
You got it, my man.
See you, man.
See y'all later. Yep.
Josh, if you're there watching, can you please jump in and close this stream down? Can you please jump in and close this stream down?
Yeah, absolutely. My apologies.